Don't look forward to the day you stop suffering, because when it comes, you'll know you're dead. Waiting is painful. Forgetting is painful. But not knowing which to do is the worst kind of suffering. In light of heaven, the worst suffering on earth will be seen to be no more serious than one night in an inconvenient hotel. All suffering is caused by ignorance. People inflict pain on others in the selfish pursuit of their happiness or satisfaction. Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. You have inherited a lifetime of tribulation. Everybody has inherited it. Take it over, make the most of it, and when you have decided you know the right way, do the best you can with it. If only mortals would learn how great it is to possess divine grace, how beautiful, how noble, how precious, how many riches it hides within itself, how many joys and delights. No one would complain about his cross or about troubles that may happen to him. If he would come to know the scales on which they are weighed when they are distributed to men. The most authentic thing about us is our capacity to create, to overcome, to endure, to transform, to love, and to be greater than our suffering. The Greek word for return is nostos. Algos means suffering. So nostalgia is the suffering caused by an unappeased yearning to return. The salvation of the world is in man's suffering. Suffer what there is to suffer. Enjoy what there is to enjoy. Regard both suffering and joy as facts of life. This separateness becomes like a prison for us, a prison that restricts us to our personal hopes and fears, and to caring only for the people nearest to us. Curiously enough, if we primarily try to shield ourselves from discomfort, we suffer. Yet, when we don't close off, when we let our hearts break, we discover our kinship with all beings. Human progress is neither automatic nor inevitable. Every step toward the goal of justice requires sacrifice, suffering, and struggle, the tireless exertions and passionate concern of dedicated individuals. Pain is never permanent. We always find that those who walked closest to Christ were those who had to bear the greatest trials. The less you open your heart to others, the more your heart suffers. We often add to our pain and suffering by being overly sensitive, overreacting to minor things, and sometimes taking things too personally. We must all suffer one of two things: the pain of discipline or the pain of regret or disappointment. Job never saw why he suffered, but he saw God, and that was enough. I do not fear death. I had been dead for billions and billions of years before I was born, and had not suffered the slightest inconvenience from it. People have a hard time letting go of their suffering. Out of a fear of the unknown, they prefer suffering that is familiar. When suffering knocks at your door and you say there is no seat for him, he tells you not to worry because he has brought his own stool. 3 passions, simple but overwhelmingly strong, have governed my life: the longing for love, the search for knowledge, and unbearable pity for the suffering of mankind. If we could read the secret history of our enemies, we should find in each man's life sorrow and suffering enough to disarm all hostility. Never to suffer would have been never to have been blessed. A man who fears suffering is already suffering from what he fears. Who will tell whether one happy moment of love, or the joy of breathing or walking on a bright morning and smelling the fresh air, is not worth all the suffering and effort which life implies? You must let suffering speak if you want to hear the truth. It requires more courage to suffer than to die. All the world is full of suffering. It is also full of overcoming. The universe is a soul-making machine, and part of that process is learning, maturing, and growing through difficult and challenging and painful experiences. The point of our lives in this world isn't comfort, but training and preparation for eternity. I swore never to be silent whenever and wherever human beings endure suffering and humiliation. Pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. The truth that many people never understand until it is too late is that the more you try to avoid suffering, the more you suffer. A suffering person does not need a lecture, he needs a listener. I do not believe that sheer suffering teaches. If suffering alone taught, all the world would be wise, since everyone suffers. To suffering must be added mourning, understanding, patience, love, openness, and the willingness to remain vulnerable. Suffering becomes beautiful when anyone bears great calamities with cheerfulness, not through insensibility, but through greatness of mind. Wisdom comes alone through suffering. Truth is, everybody is going to hurt you. You just gotta find the ones worth suffering for. There are 2 kinds of suffering. There's the suffering you run away from, which follows you everywhere. And there is the suffering you face directly, and so become free. We think that by protecting ourselves from suffering, we are being kind to ourselves. The truth is, we only become more fearful, more hardened, and more alienated. We experience ourselves as being separate from the whole,